Ever get the feeling that like portraits, old paintings, they only tell us like half the story?
Oh, absolutely.
Like take this 1523 portrait of this nobleman. Ulrich von Hütten, I think is his
Oh,
name.
okay, yeah.
He's like dressed to the nines, powerful stance, the vibe.
Mm.
But then you look closer and the guy's covered in sores.
Yeah.
And like turns out that's not some, artistic like flourish. The guy actually had syphilis.
Wow.
And that gets us to our deep dive today. It's not just about syphilis as like a disease, but like how it just exploded in Europe seemingly out of nowhere.
Right.
So our source material lays out this whole timeline, and it feels like a historical thriller, honestly.
Okay.
Like 1348, you've got the Black Death just wiping out huge chunks of Europe.
Right.
Jump ahead to 1492, Columbus, he reaches the Americas.
Huge.
Huge. But then by 1493, bam, syphilis is in Europe.
Wow.
And by 1523, it's claimed our portrait guy, von Hütten.
Yeah.
So, come on, that's suspicious timing, right?
It's very suspicious timing, and it's something that historians have been debating for, well, centuries, really. And it's right around 1500 where things get really interesting. Because you're not just talking about, like, a new century, turning over a page. It's a whole new era. This is the start of the early modern period.
Okay.
Globalization is kicking into high gear, right? Columbus's voyages open up these huge trade routes. People are moving all over the place. And, where people go, diseases often follow.
Yeah, it's like a package deal, right?
Exactly. Like, think about what happened with smallpox.
Oh, right.
Utterly devastating when it was brought over to the Americas. But it shows that this exchange went both ways.
A biological clash of continents.
Yeah.
So, all this stuff is going back and forth, makes you wonder what else might have been on those ships. And that's where that whole idea comes in, right? The one that syphilis was like this souvenir European explorers picked up in the Americas.
Right. That's been the dominant theory for a long time.
Yeah. And we even have that primary source everybody talks about, that Spanish doctor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean Ruy Diaz de Ayala?
Yes, de Ayala. He wrote a whole treatise on syphilis, like that back in 1539.
1539.
Right. And the thing is, he actually saw the outbreak happen. Like, he was there.
He was living through it, yeah.
And he was convinced that syphilis only showed up after Columbus came back.
Yeah.
He even points to Hispaniola, like present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, as the most likely origin point.
Which makes sense given what we know about the voyages and where they landed.
Right, exactly. So it's like case closed.
Well, this is where we have to put on our historian hats and think critically.
Yeah.
De Ayala's account is important, sure, but we can't just take it at face value, right?
Right.
We have to consider his perspective, potential biases, all that good stuff, and then we have to see how it lines up against other evidence. And speaking of other evidence, that's where modern science throws a bit of a curveball into the story.
Okay, I'm always up for a good curveball. What'd they find?
Well, researchers have been analyzing DNA from skeletons.
Skeletons.
Yeah, old ones. In burial sites in Europe. And some of them, they show signs of syphilis. But here's the kicker. These skeletons, they're older than Columbus's voyages.
Wait, so they're saying syphilis was in Europe before Columbus even set sail?
It seems that way. Now, dating these skeletons, it's not perfect, right? So it's not like definitive airtight proof.
Mm-hmm.
But it throws a wrench into that traditional narrative, doesn't it?
It's a big wrench. So if syphilis wasn't a stowaway from the New World, where on earth did it come from? This is like a historical medical mystery.
Well, it makes the whole story a lot more complicated, right? Because if those skeletons are right, then syphilis might have been, like, simmering in Europe for much longer than anyone thought.
Simmering.
Yeah, like it was there, but maybe not as widespread or as recognizable and mistaken for other things. So now it's not just about, okay, where did it come from? It's how did it go from under the radar to, boom, a massive outbreak in the 15th century?
Like a fire just waiting for the right conditions to, like, really ignite and take off.
Yes, exactly. And this is where understanding the context, the historical situation becomes even more important. Because the world wasn't just standing still, right? Even if syphilis was around earlier, after Columbus, you've got things like trade increasing, travel is way up, there are more wars happening. All these things could have easily created the perfect conditions for something like syphilis to spread like wildfire.
It makes you realize that historical events and these big disease outbreaks, they're like totally interconnected. And actually, our source material, it goes into this. It talks about how the Black Death, as horrible as it was, it actually ended up changing European society in ways that, and this is crazy, may have actually made it easier for diseases to spread later on.
Yeah, that's one of the, I think, most fascinating but also kind of unsettling things about studying history.
What do you mean?
It's full of unintended consequences. So you have something like the Black Death, this horrific plague, and it completely reshapes societies, leads to labor shortages, you have changes in power structures, even like religious practices were impacted.
Right.
And all of those things, they could have influenced how susceptible people were to new diseases, or even diseases that were already there, but like we were saying, maybe not recognized, like syphilis.
It's like this domino effect across centuries.
It is, kind of, yeah. And it highlights why we can't just look at disease outbreaks like they're isolated events, right?
Right.
We have to think about the broader picture, that historical context, these ripples that go out way beyond those initial causes and effects.
You know, it makes me think about, like, how much the world changed after COVID. Even now, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're still seeing the effects, like, on everything, supply chains, or how everybody works from home now.
Oh, for sure. And who knows what other changes are going to come out of it, right? Like decades from now. It really shows you how, even though we're talking about, centuries ago, we're living through history right now, just like they were back then.
It's kind of wild when you think about it like that. So, okay, we may not know for sure where syphilis came from, but looking at it this way, what can it tell us about the impact? We talked about how it, like, might have been able to spread more easily because of what happened after the Black Death.
Yeah.
But what about the long-term effects on Europe? Like, what were those?
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture stuff, right? Like when we think about history, it's all wars and revolutions and these massive events.
Right.
But when you have something like a disease outbreak, it's different. It's like insidious,
Yeah.
because it's happening on this personal level, person to person.
Right.
So did something like syphilis, did it really leave that much of a mark on European society? Like thinking big picture again?
Oh, it definitely did.
Yeah.
More than you might think, actually. Because syphilis, it wasn't just a medical crisis,
Right.
It really took on this whole social and cultural dimension, too. And, I mean, think about it. It was a terrifying disease.
Yeah, I mean, people were terrified to get it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And you can see why disfiguring often led to, like, a long, really painful decline.
So not just the physical suffering, but then on top of that, there's this whole social stigma.
Exactly. People were terrified of catching it, obviously. And if you had it, forget it. You were ostracized, blamed for it, too.
It's kind of a familiar story, though, isn't it? Even today, new disease, outbreak happens, and you see those same patterns. The fear, the blaming.
It's human nature, unfortunately. That fear of the unknown, it shapes so much of history. But back to syphilis, though. The really interesting thing is how it starts showing up in other areas of European life, like art, for example.
Oh, tell me more about that, because I don't think I've ever heard about syphilis and art, like, intersecting.
Right. You don't expect it. Seems kind of morbid, maybe. But syphilis actually became, like, a subject for some artists, especially during the Renaissance.
They were actually, like, depicting the disease in their artwork.
Yeah, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so much. You'd see these paintings with figures that have, the telltale rashes, or scenes that are hinting at, like, the social isolation of people with syphilis. And other times, they just went for it, showed the really harsh realities of what it could do to you.
Wow. I guess the saying's true. Art imitates life. Even back then, it makes you wonder, were these artists doing this to, like, raise awareness even back then?
That's a great question. It's definitely something to think about, because art has always been a way for people to, process difficult things, deal with suffering, or even just to get people talking. So those works of art, they become this way of documenting syphilis's impact on, like, a whole society, intentionally or not.
It really makes you think about how something that starts out as, like, a biological threat, a disease, it can have these huge ripple effects outwards. Like, it ends up shaping art, culture, even just how people live their lives.
Totally. Shows you how connected everything really is. Disease, history, how we behave. It all ties together.
Well, we have covered a ton of ground today.
Yeah, we have.
We've talked about all these old theories about syphilis, how they might be wrong, how it might really got into Europe, and then how syphilis, it wasn't just a disease. It changed art. It changed culture. It's been quite a deep dive.
It has. And I think if we're going to take away one thing from all of this, it's that history. It's messy. There's no easy answers. What we learned today, we might learn something totally different tomorrow. And that's okay.
Yeah, like with those skeletons, right?
Yeah.
Who knew they'd completely change how we think about syphilis? It shows that sometimes it's the smallest details that can change how we view history.
Exactly.
And who knew a deep dive on syphilis would be so interesting, right?
You never know where these things will lead.